Civilizations usually announce their endings. They leave behind flames, speeches, final battles, names carved into stone. They collapse loudly, dramatically, with stories that insist on being remembered. But the Indus Valley does something stranger. It fades. No great conqueror's name echoes through its ruins. No epic war poems survive. No final king stands carved in defeat. Instead, there is silence. Orderly streets without people, wells without hands, bricks without voices. For a civilization that once stretched across more land than Egypt or Mesopotamia, this silence feels wrong, almost intentional. And that discomfort raises a quiet contradiction. We often assume civilizations fall because they are destroyed, invaded, burned, overthrown. But what if some civilizations don't fall at all? What if they simply loosen their grip on the world and step away? The Indus Valley, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dholavira, once thrummed with precision and balance. Cities aligned with the stars. Drainage systems more advanced than many medieval capitals. Streets planned not for kings, but for movement, hygiene, and order. And then, around 1900 BCE, the pattern changes. Not violently, gradually. Bricks shift in size, trade thins, writing disappears, cities empty, and history, uncomfortable with quiet endings, begins to invent noise. The story we wanted to tell. For a long time, scholars reached for a familiar explanation: invaders. They imagined chariots spilling from the northwest, warriors speaking Indo-European tongues, a violent overthrow, a clean narrative of replacement. It was comforting in its simplicity. Civilizations fall when someone stronger arrives. But the ground itself resisted that story. There were no widespread burn layers, no mass graves, no weapons scattered in panic. The cities weren't smashed. They were abandoned. Even the famous skeletons at Mohenjo-daro, once framed as proof of massacre, turned out to be unrelated burials from different eras, quietly misinterpreted by eager minds. The story of invasion began to feel like a projection, a habit of history, a desire to see collapse as conflict, because conflict is easier to narrate than disappearance. So the explanation shifted. If not conquest, then catastrophe. The earth that moved without warning, the Indus world was married to water. Rivers defined its rhythm, floods fertilized fields, trade followed currents, life flowed, but rivers are loyal only until they aren't. Geological evidence suggests the Ghaggar-Hakra river system, possibly the legendary Saraswati, began to weaken long before the cities emptied. Tectonic shifts altered its course, monsoons grew erratic, floods became unpredictable, then insufficient. Water, once generous, became unreliable, and yet, even this explanation feels incomplete. Droughts have come and gone throughout history. Civilizations adapt. They dig deeper wells, shift crops, move settlements. The Indus people did exactly that. They didn't panic. They adjusted. Cities became smaller. Settlements dispersed eastward. Urban density softened into rural networks. Life continued, just differently. This wasn't collapse. It was reorganization, which raises an unsettling question. If they adapted so smoothly, why did their civilization as a recognizable whole vanish? Why did writing stop? Why did monumental planning cease? Why did memory itself seem to withdraw? A civilization without kings. To understand what vanished, we have to notice what never existed. There are no grand palaces in the Indus cities, no royal tombs, no statues declaring divine rulers. Power leaves few fingerprints here. Instead, what dominates the ruins are systems: drains, standardized bricks, uniform weights, identical city layouts. The signature is coordination, not command. This was a civilization obsessed with balance. It valued regularity over grandeur, cleanliness over spectacle, order over hierarchy. And perhaps that is where the missing piece begins to emerge. Most civilizations are built upward, toward gods, kings, monuments, and legacy. The Indus seems to have been built sideways, outward, evenly, quietly. What happens to a civilization when it never teaches itself to shout? When authority is distributed rather than centralized? When meaning is embedded in daily life rather than immortalized in stone? Perhaps such a society is resilient in one sense and fragile in another. Because when slow change arrives, climate shifts, trade realignments, migrations, there is no singular center to fight for survival, no throne to defend, no ideology demanding continuity, only people making practical choices and leaving. The vanishing script. One of the most haunting absences is the writing. Indus seals appear everywhere, small, elegant symbols carved with care. But they remain undeciphered, short, repetitive, reserved. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian tablets, these inscriptions never grew into sprawling texts. No epics, no laws, no royal proclamations. Why? Perhaps writing in the Indus world was never meant to explain reality, only to label, to count, to mark ownership or ritual. If so, then writing wasn't identity, it was utility. And when trade networks shrank, when systems decentralized, writing quietly lost its purpose. Imagine a society where meaning is not stored in text, but in practice, in habits, in shared rhythms, in ways of living passed by observation. When such a society disperses, its memory doesn't shatter, it dissolves. And dissolution leaves no archive. The slow exit. Archaeology suggests something subtle but profound. People didn't flee in terror, they relocated. Settlements shifted eastward toward the Ganges, villages replaced cities, crafts simplified, long-distance trade declined. The Indus world didn't end in a scream, it exhaled. This challenges a deep instinct we carry, that collapse must look catastrophic to matter. But perhaps collapse can be quiet, almost polite. Perhaps it can look like adaptation, until, centuries later, we realize what was lost. Which leads to an unsettling possibility. What if the Indus didn't fail? What if it chose a different scale of existence? The question beneath the ruins. Here the story turns inward, because the mystery of the Indus isn't only archaeological, it is psychological. We are drawn to civilizations that conquer, expand, dominate, leave monuments screaming their names across time. We struggle to understand cultures that value balance over permanence. So we ask, why did it crumble? But perhaps the deeper question is, why do we assume endurance must look like visibility? Why do we equate survival with expansion? The Indus people may have understood something quietly radical, that systems built for harmony, not immortality, can afford to dissolve without trauma. That continuity of life matters more than continuity of institutions. That fading is not the same as failing. A civilization that refused to shout. Imagine living in a world without kings, without epics, without monuments meant to intimidate time. Imagine measuring success not by how long your name lasts, but by how well your city functions while you are alive. The Indus cities suggest a philosophy rarely spoken but deeply practiced. Stability over spectacle, function over fame, balance over glory. Such a worldview does not produce dramatic endings. It produces quiet transitions. And history, addicted to drama, struggles to notice them. The missing piece. So what is the missing piece? Not invasion, not apocalypse, not even climate alone. The missing piece may be psychological. A civilization organized around balance does not resist change the way hierarchical empires do. When conditions shift, it doesn't cling. It adapts, even if adaptation means becoming unrecognizable. In that sense, the Indus didn't collapse. It unmade itself gently. Its people flowed into new cultural forms, new regions, new languages, carrying fragments of old habits rather than old monuments. What disappeared was not the people, but the idea of civilization as something that must dominate its environment to justify its existence. A mirror held quietly, and now the story circles back to us. We live in an age obsessed with permanence, with growth curves, with visibility, with legacy. We measure success by scale, collapse by spectacle. But what if some endings are not failures, but decisions made slowly, collectively, almost unconsciously? What if sustainability does not look like survival of systems, but survival of life? The Indus Valley leaves us with an uncomfortable mirror, a civilization that mastered urban planning, hygiene, and coordination, yet left behind no voice demanding remembrance. It asks a quiet question across 4,000 years. If your world had to change, would you fight to preserve its shape? Or would you know how to let it soften into something new? The silence that still speaks. Today, the bricks remain, perfectly proportioned, patient, uncomplaining. They do not accuse history. They do not explain themselves. They simply endure. And in their silence, they offer something rare. A reminder that not all power announces itself, not all endings explode, and not all civilizations wish to be eternal. Some are content to pass their wisdom forward invisibly, like a river changing course, like a city emptying without panic, like a story that refuses to shout but still waits to be heard. The question that lingers. So when we ask, why did the Indus Valley crumble? We may be asking the wrong thing. Perhaps the better question is quieter and more unsettling. What if collapse is sometimes a form of wisdom? And if so, what would it mean for us to recognize the moment when holding on becomes more dangerous than letting go? The Indus does not answer. It only leaves space for the question to echo. And in that echo, something ancient still listens. Subscribe Timeless Questions channel for more thought-provoking stories about philosophy, history, and the unseen forces shaping our world.